Ladies and gentlemen, this is the reconvened meeting of the local plan discussion, and today we will be going through highways, and we have with us William Ryan from Surrey County Council, and we're waiting on the Mott MacDonald visitor. So what we will be doing, and I'll start the agenda proper in a moment. One of the things we will be doing is we will be doing the Surrey highways first. I've explained to William that part of our problem is it is also terribly technical. So we need a child's guide to what it actually says so that we can understand and we can ask questions. Our visitor from Mott MacDonald has just arrived. Thank you so much. Make yourself at home, and when you're ready, we'll start. So if I go into the reconvened agenda, apologies for absence, Emma.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Councillors Ramsdale, Hunter, Lee, Thornton, Coburn, Williamson and Wheatley.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Do I have any additional ones on highways? I have one. I'm a county councillor. Anybody else? Now, if you are not a member of the committee and you wish to speak, unless you put your name down before 12 o'clock, you will not be allowed to speak. They are the rules of the game. Is that all right? Thank you very much indeed. Right, Mr. Parrott, do you wish to start, or do I start directly with William? You might like to introduce us where we are.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, as you know, members, we got as far as working our way through the draft plan, and the meeting was adjourned at the point when we were going to go into a discussion on the transport evidence. You had received, I think, copies of both the strategic transport assessment, or strategic highways assessment as it's known, that Surrey County Council produced on our behalf, and also the work that Mott MacDonald have been doing. Some of you will know actually that the reports from Mott MacDonald published in relation to the Cranley sector in the A281 were actually published some time ago. The reports that were published more recently were reports dealing with the Farnham area, and a report that wraps everything up together. So, Chairman, I've nothing more to say about your introduction. William Bryans is here from Surrey County Council, who's involved in the strategic assessment, and Sean Finney from Mott MacDonald has been doing the work for us on the more local assessments. And, Chairman, if I hand over to William Bryans initially.
Which is helpful. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much. I thought I'd just start off by giving you a very brief précis, and then by all means ask me any detailed questions. So this is something that technical piece of work that we do for all the planning authorities in Surrey to help them both develop the local plans, and also in preparation for a submission to the Secretary of State, and then also further down the line in preparation for an examination in public. So for this work, we use our county highway model. So it represents or it replicates conditions on the roads. It only at the moment replicates traffic. It doesn't deal with walking, cycling, public transport. It's just traffic. And it was what is known as validated to 2009. So it represents conditions on the road network as they were in 2009. And there is a separate report on that, and that shows that it meets the validation criteria well. So in terms of the methodology that we adopt, we forecast into the future, and in this case we're looking to 2031. And although your plan is for 2033, for the purposes of the technical assessment, we assume that everything is in place by 2031. So we use national data from the Department for Transport to forecast forward, but for planning data from Waverley, we actually use detailed information supplied by your officers. In this case, because of the interest with your neighbouring authority, Guildford, we've also used detailed planning information from them as well, and the assessment assumes that the Guildford local plan is adopted as well. So it assumes that it's gone forward and it's in the background, so it assumes that it's there. In terms of the effect of Waverley's proposals on the highway network, the first thing to say is that the actual overall impact is relatively small. Yes, there are increases in vehicle kilometres and vehicle hours, so that's how far people drive, and replicates the increase in the amount of traffic and also the amount of delay that will be incurred by all users on the highway network. But the reduction in average speed is small. It's only 2%, and that's effectively dropping from 58 kilometres an hour to 57 kilometres an hour. And that's an average across the network in Waverley, so it includes the A3 and it includes all the A roads and the B roads that are in the strategic model. In terms of changes to the network, in terms of changes to the traffic, we've looked at a do minimum, which includes all the background growth, including Guildford's growth. We've then add in Waverley's proposed growth. We then add in network changes that may come in to accompany the plan. And that includes changes on the local road network, and that includes potential changes on the A3 as well. So scenario 2 is, well, scenario 1 is the do minimum. Scenario 2 is the same but includes Waverley's data, and scenario 3 is when we add in the mitigation. So when we add in Waverley's proposals, we see that most of the large changes are occurring in the Dunsfold and Cranley area, which is not surprising given the proposed level of growth in that area. We then start to see, if we add in the mitigation, we start to see that rerouting is occurring as a result of people making changes to the way they travel through the network, taking advantage of improvements to junctions, and we're seeing particularly changes occurring in the Farnham area. And then finally, we're seeing fairly significant changes as a result of a potential widening of the A3 through Guildford. In terms of again, changes in flow, we see that there are fairly large changes in terms of traffic travelling north on the A281 corridor, not necessarily on the A281 itself, but certainly on that corridor and crossing the North Downs from the Dunsfold and Cranley area, heading up to the A3. And we also see changes in flow travelling from the Dunsfold Cranley area northwestwards towards Milford and up to Farnham as well. As I've said, we then start to see, when we add in the mitigation, we start to see changes as a result of improvements in the network, particularly around the Farnham location. I should add that once the widening of the A3 goes into the model at Guildford, we start to see large changes as a result of trips making the opportunity as trips take advantage of the opportunity to travel on the A3 through Guildford as a result of that increased capacity. And the key message for Waverley is that changes flows on the local roads on approaches to the junctions with the A3. In terms of congestion, the most congested part of the borough, as you will all be aware, is around Farnham, and this remains the case despite the fact that there are increases in flow in the east of the borough to reflect the growth in the Dunsfold and Cranley areas. Again, junction improvements. Junction improvements again show that there are changes again to how people travel through the network, and we're seeing that links in the Farnham area remain congested as well. So in terms of the junctions, so I've said that this highlights the Farnham area, but once we see the growth going into Dunsfold and Cranley, we see that there are impacts on the junctions there, particularly the Nanhurst Crossroads, which is the junction of the A281 with Elmbridge Road. We're seeing Cranley High Street, junctions on Cranley High Street, the one-way workings on Elmbridge Road itself, and at junctions also in Milford and Farnham. But again, once mitigation goes in, we're seeing that some of that mitigation has positive effects and starts to relieve the increase. But other junctions that you will see in the report are still coming out showing that they are an issue, and that could be because the model can't reflect what those changes are, but it also could mean that the design that's gone in needs looking at still to accommodate the increase in trips. And in particular, we're showing those junctions include Shalford, Bramley, and over on the west side, in the vicinity of Badshot Lee, and on the A31 Blackwater Valley route. In terms of cross-boundary impacts, the main impacts are going north into Guildford Borough and then going southwest into Hampshire in the Rushmore area. Of course, key to this is one of the aspects that will be looked at very closely, particularly by Highways England, will be the potential impact on the A3. Looking at the changes in flow on the A3 south of Guildford, where we see up to 200, just under 200 additional trips being added to the A3, which would be equivalent to extending the existing queue that happens at the moment by about 600 metres. There are ways that can be dealt with to avoid safety issues, so there are ways that can be mitigated for safety reasons. The actual level of increase through Guildford in both directions is about 100 to 150 trips in the morning period and also in the evening period. But we then start to see that there are also increases in trips north of that as vehicles, as drivers from Waverley join at both Burnt Common and at Ockham. In the evening peak, the largest increase on the A3 coming southbound occurs just after the diverge with the Hogsback. So that's after the section through Guildford when the A3 has, when the traffic on the A3, part of that has obviously gone on to the A31 Hogsback itself. The widening, as I've mentioned, the widening of the A3, the possible widening of the A3 through Guildford, which is included in the road investment strategy as a proposal, shows that traffic on the whole is attracted to it to increase that, to make use of that increased capacity, and as a result, traffic reroutes. So, in summary, there are increases on the network, but predominantly these are closest to the largest development sites, particularly in Dunsfold, Cranley and around Farnham. Farnham area is the most congested, and it remains the most congested area. Although there are increases in traffic, the impact on average speeds is only about 2%. But there are impacts shown on the B roads and the minor roads. That's partly as a result of the locations of the developments and the way that traffic routes through the network. As I've said, there is the issue of the A3, which will be of concern to the Highways England, but we consider, Surrey considers that the residual impacts are not severe in the terms of, under the terms of the National Planning Policy Framework. And one of the other last key messages is that the way that we've done this assessment, it does not take into account any potential increased opportunities for when it comes to planning the development sites for sustainable travel. So it will take into account that certain proportion of people will travel by car and travel by bus, but it doesn't take into account what else might be able to be done as a part of detailed planning. Thank you.
Mr. Bryant, thank you very much indeed. Could I now go on to Sean? I'm sorry, I've forgotten your surname already. Finney. Mr. Finney, could I now ask you to talk about the Mott-MacDonald report in the same sort of succinct way? That was really, I now understand what we're talking about. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. So for our work, there were 4 stages. The first stage was really setting out the methodology to use in stage 2, which looked at the A281 corridor in particular. Then stage 3 looked at the Farnham area, and stage 4 took a sort of wider view of the whole area in terms of sustainability. So if I just briefly run through stage 2 work and the findings there. So stage 2 was looking at the A281 corridor and particularly the impact of housing in Dunsfold, the new Dunsfold development. We did new traffic surveys of the key junctions through there and noted that there are already delays and congestion along that route. So not surprisingly, with general traffic growth, that congestion is only going to get worse. And then we looked at the addition of new housing at Dunsfold, but then proposed measures to improve the capacity of these key junctions. So just going through the key junctions, the first one, the A248 Kings Road, that's the Shalford roundabout, and the priority junction immediately to the south. Proposed scheme there is to signalise both of those junctions and with widening of the roads to get more lanes at the signals, and that our work showed that scheme should be able to accommodate the trips with up to 3,400 houses at Dunsfold. An issue there with the scheme that was proposed is that it does require widening onto common land, so there is an approvals process, a potentially lengthy process to go through if that scheme is to be taken forward. The next junction was the Station Road mini roundabout in Bramley, and the developer in their transport assessment weren't proposing any schemes, but they'd previously proposed a signalisation of that junction, which we looked at and said that should be able to accommodate the additional traffic. And the last junction was the Nanhurst Crossroads, the Elmbridge Road crossroads to the west of Cranley, which the scheme is there, it's already signalised, is to widen the approaches to get more capacity through that junction. And again, we showed that should be able to accommodate the predicted increase in demand. So in summary, for stage 2 of the work, that suggested that additional houses could be accommodated at Dunsfold and the additional traffic could be accommodated through those junctions with some fairly major improvement schemes. We also noted that there was a potential issue for additional traffic on east-west routes along minor roads, which is what I think the strategic assessment was showing as well, such as on Markwick Lane going into Milford and the B2130 going up to Godalming and High Street Green. Although we didn't assess the impacts in detail, and it's very difficult to say what the impact would be in terms of capacity and road safety, but there would be more traffic using those local roads. And we're currently looking at the potential impact of heavy goods vehicles using those roads, so that's a piece of ongoing work that we're doing now. The stage 3 was looking at Farnham, and as noted, it's the busiest or the most congested area in the borough, particularly on the A31 and the key junctions of the Shepherd and Flock roundabout and the Hickley's Corner signalised junction. But we also note that there are delays on the A287 and the A325 at the moment. So here we looked at possible further 2,300 houses in Farnham, which would give an overall predicted increase of about 30% in traffic levels through the area. So not surprising when we modelled that, we got increased delays, increased queuing, but again looked at improvements. And we came up with some improvements at Shepherd and Flock that further signalisation of the roundabout and widening of the approaches would or should be able to increase the capacity of the roundabout. But then once you release more traffic out, it then has a knock-on effect at a number of other junctions. And we're currently looking at that now. So what other junctions would need to be improved if you improve the Shepherd and Flock to accommodate the traffic that's released? So such as the Six Bells roundabout on the A325, probably needs an improvement there to handle the extra traffic coming up from the south. But the result of the work is we believe it should be largely possible to mitigate the impacts of the additional housing in Farnham, but there will be some additional delay, and that's inevitable given the background growth in the area. And then stage 4 was looking at the wider issues, so not just road traffic. We consider a number of issues in relation to potential housing in Farnham, Cranley or Dunsfold. And finally, Farnham, based on existing census data, so census data for 2011, in Farnham and Cranley, there's about, I think it's about 30% of trips to work are contained within the town. So 30% of people live and work in the same town, whereas Dunsfold, that would be, I think it was a lot less, at about 20% would like to live and work locally. Again, Farnham and Cranley have a lower car mode share than would be expected at Dunsfold. And at Cranley, car drivers are generally travelling less to work in their car, less distance to get to work. In terms of access to rail and bus services and public transport, Farnham is obviously much better with a mainline railway station and good bus services, and also better access to local facilities by walking and cycling. But then also noting in terms of traffic congestion, Farnham is going to be the sort of busiest area. But overall, if you talk about sustainable transport, then Farnham would be a better place for housing compared to Dunsfold or Cranley. So those are the sort of headlines from the three main reports.
Thank you very much indeed. That's helpful. Now it's really open to members. Yes, sir, Councillor.
May we take it then that with this comprehensive report that has been very, very carefully prepared, that the scenario we're in at the moment is never likely to be cleared, and from what I hear, it's not going to be improved. In fact, it's probably going to get worse, because we're still looking at models and schemes that will not have been proposed, and the junctions, if you travel regularly on those roads now, are badly blockaged, particularly for deliveries and bicycles. on the state of the roads, particularly on the 281 that you just stated. So is it that we expect from your report that you've now prepared for us that this is not going to be an improvement and we anticipate a worsening condition? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Bryant, do you wish to take this?
Thank you. I should say that as part of taking forward any development, the developers' consultants would have to consider the impacts of the development on the adjacent routes and on key junctions on those routes. And if there was shown to be an impact, then as part of their work, they would need to come up with proposals to address those impacts. And some of those proposals may be able to address what are potentially existing conditions, but they're not obliged to do that. They have to deal with what the additional trips or movement, both by vehicular movement and by pedestrians and cyclists and buses, they have to deal with that and show that there will be nil detriment. But that comes up at the detailed stage, and they should do that work as part of submitting a planning application.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Band?
Thank you, Chairman. Well, first, thank you for your presentation and your explanation. I think it clarifies some of the points. But what I seem to understand, your model actually looks at the traffic borough-wide in context, but doesn't actually look in detail at individual junctions. Am I right in that understanding?
It does model individual junctions, but not to the level of detail that developers would need to look at when submitting an application. Okay,
thank you for that. Because again, like my colleague, the last speaker, some of the junctions, and I live in Shamley Green. I use the 281 and A248 junction on a regular basis in the mornings, and I know how congested that is, and I know what the backlogs are, and I can't help feeling that in reality, adding another 3,000 houses plus into the network, where all the evidence tends to show that in Cranley area, 75 to 80% of the people travel to work by car, and some like 50% of those people are actually going to London via the railway or in some form or other. We're talking about not 100 or so, we're talking about 1,000 or so more movements somewhere along the network with the impact of this. So, I mean, that is already congested. I understand the mitigation measures proposed, but they seem to be more aimed at helping cross-flow rather than the flow along the 281 itself. Because my observation is the 281 is blocked at that Shalford roundabout because of the backlog from Guildford, backing up from the gyratory system in Guildford. So, we have as you rightly said, we have an interborough issue, and resolving of how you get traffic on the 281 into Guildford, to Guildford Station, seems to be a major issue, which, to my mind, there's not enough at the moment in this report. But as you say, maybe this has to come from the developer in due course. But, it really is a significant issue. It's all very well enhancing cross-flow, but if we can't resolve the actual movement of the 281 to its ultimate journey, including finding somewhere for the cars to park when they get to Guildford Station, I mean, it seems to me we really are running into a major significant problem.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Do you wish to take that? Or Mr. Finney? I don't mind.
So in terms of going into Guildford, we know that the gyratory in the town centre is a constraint, but when we did our work, there was no firm proposal from Guildford on what they're planning to do there. So we couldn't really assess what the impact's going to be in more detail, but we know there is a constraint going into Guildford.
Do you accept it's a constraint which needs to be addressed?
Yes, but it's...
I think, Chairman, and this may be raise a number of occasions this evening in relation to this, because members will know that there's, obviously with the planning application that's in at the moment, there are a lot of issues that have been identified through that process, and that includes some comments that Guildford Borough Council have raised on the planning application. And obviously we're waiting at the moment, the County Council are waiting at the moment to see what the developer response to that is. That there's a limit to the work that either the strategic assessment can do or the work that's been done so far in terms of how far that can progress, because a lot of these more detailed issues will be picked up through the assessment of the planning application, and it's for that reason obviously that we have qualified, if you like, the reference to Dunsfold and its identification in the plan with the fact that there still needs to be more work done to resolve these issues, and ultimately planning permission would need to be granted, and it's through that process that we'll pick up a lot of these detailed issues. And as I said, I'm sure Guildford Borough Council, just like us, are waiting very patiently to see what further information can be provided in terms of the impact from Dunsfold developments on the gyratory, on the assumption that that's not likely to be changing in the short term, and how that sits with some of their plans and aspirations, for example, to improve car parking in and around Guildford.
Bernd, I'll take one more question from you and then I'll move on.
Thank you very much for your discussion, Chairman. All it does goes to emphasise my comment last week, Madam Chairman, on paragraph 1816 of the draft plan, which actually indicated that having tested the likely highway impacts would arise as a result of development, the council considers appropriate mitigation improvements for junctions can be substantially delivered. I mean, I think it's what we're saying now. It's at the not proven stage. You know, I think we haven't demonstrated that. I think there are issues which need to be resolved more clearly before we can demonstrate that. And you know, the reservations I made last week, I think, are soundly based.
Your point is taken. We'll make sure that's recorded in the notes. Mr. Holder?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and apologies for being late for this meeting, but it is the rush hour. So, I fully support the comments made by the last speaker, and I'd like to refer to page 17 and 18 of the strategic housing assessment, highway assessment, on page, to say that the figures for the arrival and evening rush hours for zones 570, 572 and 573, in other words in the Dunsfold-Cranley area, amount to respectively 622 and 1,121. In other words, nearly half of the entire traffic flows for the entire borough is now funneled onto one road, the A281. It's completely unsustainable. The improvements on the A281, namely the implementation of the signals at Bramley Crossroads, and also the establishment of a roundabout on the A281 and the A248 as outlined, I think would have a minimum impact on the huge development that we're proposing for Dunsfold and Cranley. As on page 31, paragraph 4/5/14, it states that the traffic from the Cranley-Dunsfold developments will try and avoid the bottlenecks on the A281 and find their way through to the A3 via unclassified roads in Dunsfold, Chiddingfold, Whitley and Milford. I think this will establish huge bottlenecks on the A3. The proposed widening of the A3 Guildford bypass between junction the A31 and the Woking Road A320 from 2 lanes to 3 will just kick the can further down the road and create huge traffic jams between Hindhead Tunnel and the A31 junction, and also on the A31 itself. The report states that the improvement of the widening of the Guildford bypass will increase traffic flow, as already been stated, by 2%, in other words, from 10 miles an hour to 10.2 miles an hour. I'm sorry, I don't work in kilometres, miles an hour, my car doesn't do that. So basically, I'm saying that this plan is well constructed, but it's unrealistic and unsustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Holder. Anybody else? Yes, Mr. Goodrich.
We talked about, on the Surrey assessment, we we've taken into account Guildford and we've taken into account what we're proposing or could be doing. How much has been taken into account and how much information have you received from the Horsham end, so far as the 281 is concerned? Because it seems to me an awful lot of extra traffic starting and is going to grow in the next few years as a result of that. And I'd like your comments on that, please.
Thank you. Yes, that was taken into account. It was taken into account because those developments were planned a little while ago and are included in the national data set. As far as we can possibly tell, it's very difficult to drill down into the national data set. But we've also been looking at the potential impact with Horsham, and the work that they have done shows that a relatively small proportion of traffic is proposed to come up the A281. I say relatively small. There is some traffic, but a lot of traffic from that area, the work that they've done shows that it will go up the A24 and also to the further to the east, but also a large focus of the trips that emanate from those developments also go south, and that was a concern that we had when they were raised. But we have been working with them, and as I said, those trips are included in the model.
Mr. Ellis?
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose I'm really puzzled here. You know, we are facing 1,500 new dwellings in Cranley, and having lived there for the past 40 years, and indeed used my car to get to and from work, usually on the A3 or to the station in Guildford if I managed to catch a train, things do not really seem to have changed at all. I'm looking on page 10 of this Strategic Highway Assessment Report now, and mitigation schemes in both Waverley and Guildford are included in scenarios 3, 4 and 5 set out below. And about the only thing I can see there is improvements to the signalised junction of the Nanhurst Crossroads. Since that became signalised quite a number of years ago, I think it has worked remarkably well. It allows traffic to cross from Cranley towards Dunsfold. It also allows traffic from Cranley, or indeed from Dunsfold, to join the A281 with absolutely no problem at all. I personally have never come across a problem with the signalised junction at Nanhurst Crossroads. What I am concerned about, and it doesn't seem to figure in this report at all, is the canal bridge on Elmbridge Road, which remains single track. The the bridge over the Downs Link in Elmbridge Road remains single track. Alfold Road, we have 2 single-track bridges there, which, if we are looking at a sizable amount of the traffic coming out of this new development, at the moment it seems to be followed down the Alfold Road to get onto the A281. So we've got to try and overcome 2 single-track bridges there. And then, of course, at Run Common, if you want to get through via Shamley Green and so on, there's yet another single-track bridge there as well. And none of these seem to figure anywhere. I'm just wondering, is anybody actually looking at all of these challenges that have existed for the residents of Cranley, the existing residents of Cranley, at the moment for a great many years, and they will still be there for the residents of 1,500 new houses over the next 20, 30 years as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Bryan, do you have any comment to make?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Some of those specific locations are not included in the model simply because it's a strategic model and they're quite difficult to reflect accurately. The bridge, the single-track railway bridge on Elmbridge Road over the Downs link is included, but it's very difficult in the strategic model to reflect what potential changes could be made there. I am aware that that colleagues at Surrey are working with the developers of housing in Cranley to consider changes that can be made to the signals on Elmbridge Road. I'm also aware that there is a potential solution to the single lane working over the canal, but I don't know when that might be implemented. But I know that there has been work done on that. So there are things that are being considered as part of development taking place in that area, but I cannot say for everything that so, for example, on Runmore Common Road, I'm not aware of any changes there.
Come in there for a moment, Mr. Ellis. The Elmbridge Road bridge, there is an ITS scheme which is likely to be put forward in the autumn and constructed in the autumn to relieve that bottleneck. You want to come back?
Briefly, thank you, Chairman. I'm worried that things are being considered when we are faced with the new development, 1,500 new houses. We need things done before they start to build. Otherwise, it will just grind to a halt. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Ellis, your point is very well taken. You will remember at the last meeting, I did actually say to members, these 9,000 houses are not going to be built tomorrow. They are going to be built over a 30-year period. And one of the things which we do currently in looking at local, and we're looking at strategically here, looking at local developments is, it is important we look at the plans of planning applications for the local things that are being done on that planning application, because that is where we can influence something at a local level. And I think it's a discussion that needs to be had with the portfolio holder and the planners as to how members might impart their knowledge when a planning application for 100 houses comes up, is to look at what they want to do. What we're looking at here with our colleagues is a strategic position, but we're not going to have 9,000 houses built tomorrow. So, but I do understand your concern, and I too have concerns of my own. And what I'd like to do is to come in with my concerns. Mr. Bryant, in looking at the Surrey issue, we are going to have in Farnham the huge development of Borden, and we also have the Hindhead Tunnel, which affects Farnham. Because when the Hindhead Tunnel is closed for any sort of reason, and it's closed quite a lot, we find that the traffic is diverted from the A3 up the A325 and through Recklesham and Farnham bypass. I'm not so bothered about Farnham bypass, that's a dual carriageway, but I am bothered about Recklesham. And there is no reference made in this document at all to promoting the Recklesham Relief Road in conjunction with Hampshire County Council. And I think that is a grave mistake, an omission, as far as Farnham is concerned. The other omission that I think is, and this may not be strategic, so forgive me if it's not, and you can tell me it's not, and that is that Farnham has two A roads crossing each other in the middle of the town. Surrey itself, its Surrey Highways, are currently working on a proposal as to how we might make the traffic move faster. But you have those two A roads crossing the town, and at the top, one of the roads goes to Hale, and the Upper Hale Road, which is really very windy, it's going downhill, and it's taking traffic off the M3 and bringing it through that part of Farnham to go out. And there is no mitigation measures obviously put into the plan to deal with that. And I would like to see us consider something. It's not a matter of local planning, because there is no local planning going on there. There are no big enough sites to involve local planning there. So I'd like us to consider whether it's a strategic issue and what we might do to mitigate the impacts on that part of the town. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think with regard to the Recklesham bypass, we have only put into the work that you have before you those schemes that are likely to go ahead as part of mitigation for development schemes. We have not put in place anything that would have to go to any major scheme that would have to be, that is uncertain, for example, that would have to go to the local economic partnership as part of a bid for funding from the LEP. The A3 schemes have been put in because they are stated as schemes that will be developed in the road investment strategies. But I think we all need to consider what the Highways England are doing as part of that, and that will come forward in due course. But as far as the Recklesham bypass goes, I'm not aware of any plans at the moment to take that forward as a confirmed scheme. I'm aware it's on a list of schemes to potentially come forward, but not something that's confirmed. And we only put in those schemes that we could be certain of at the moment. With regards to Upper Hale Road, I appreciate the point that you make. It's not something that, or it's very difficult for us to address that in the strategic model. But it is something that we're working with Sean Finney and Mark MacDonald in terms of looking at the eastern route round Farnham, and it is also something that we're looking at as part of the town centre work that is being taken forward as well. Thank you.
Mr. Brad, thank you very much indeed. The other impact that the Recklesham Relief Road will suffer from is, in fact, and this is a set scheme, the Borden Ecotown. And the villages in Hampshire around Recklesham are very concerned about the impact of traffic from the Borden Ecotown, which will come down the A325 through their villages into ours. And therefore I think this is something which has a direct impact on that part of Farnham and needs to be addressed in this assessment. I'm sorry to be so pedantic about it, but I see this all the time. And I think we do need to do it. Whether we have to go to the LEP for money, I don't know. But, you know, Recklesham's a conservation area, and the houses shake every time a lorry goes down, and people can't cross the road. We can't put a zebra crossing in because it's not safe enough. So, all in all, I leave those thoughts with you. Can I have Mr. Upton now, please?
Thank you. In support of your proposition from the A3 service road, I wondered if it was taken into account, as I've seen since the Tynehead Tunnel has opened, using that road regularly going down to Portsmouth, the divergence of the traffic coming from the M3 now, using the A3 as a preferential road, and it's a solid stream of cars from Portsmouth. It's not just local traffic from around this area, it's traffic build-up from the entire A3 starting at Portsmouth. And I can't see that any improvements they do at Guildford is going to improve that situation whilst the M3 is in the condition it is, and everybody, I've seen the traffic travelling along the A27 to feed into the A3M. And I have experienced the divergence when they've been working on the tunnel, and I appreciate that it does take quite a considerable time to get through vehicles through the existing trunk roads or B roads and A roads around Borden and Farnham. But I'm rather concerned that this is something that's happened that hasn't been taken into account by every planner of the A3. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Upton. Mrs Wojciechowski.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a couple of facts that I'd like to bring to members' attention is that in Cranley we do need an infrastructure before we do start to build, but I think it's worth reminding ourselves that out of the 1,500 that is proposed, 700 plus have already been granted permission with no objection from the highways. So in actual fact, what we're looking at here is the remaining up to the 1,500 is what you're saying, is that what we're looking at in terms of mitigation and further works and improvements need to be done. So I think there are three major schemes currently given approval that haven't started, and Madam Chairman, you're absolutely quite right. I mean, development is going to be staged, and it's going to be staged over a period of time. But in Cranley, as we speak, for a village that hasn't had major development for a long, long time, and it's got three major applications on the table, none of which have started yet, which will do in the months and years to come. If they all start together, that is going to be a massive impact overall, simply because we will have had, and that's without the other 700-800 that is coming our way. So if we take all the development that's happening, they all start together, we can stage it, but you've got three major developments in a village like Cranley that is really quite small. So I actually think that the point that one of my fellow councillors made, that we are going to get the housing before we get the infrastructure, and it doesn't seem right to me. So I would appreciate any comments on that matter. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Mrs Sims, can I apologise because you indicated earlier you wanted to speak and I didn't mean to ignore you.
Thank you. And actually, Chairman, what I was going to add probably covers off this point as well. In relation to the Cranley developments that have already got planning permission, Councillor Forrest is of course correct that the County Highway Authority didn't raise objection in principle, but they have all been subject to appropriate mitigation and Section 106 contributions being made to mitigate the impact of those developments. And members recall, I think at the last meeting, we did make reference to the good work that has been going on without prejudice with the developers of the sites coming forward in Cranley to identify with some Cranley members what the perceived key pinch points are and required infrastructure heads should be for those developments to contribute to allow a measure of, as I say, without prejudice, prioritisation to ensure those contributions can be pooled and that each development will make a pro rata appropriate contribution to ensuring delivery of those highway improvement works. And in fact, that bit of work was very useful during the Berkeley Homes inquiry when the inspector came to discuss the conditions and mitigation that would be appropriate in the event of permission being granted, to understand how those contributions should be put to, and the developer was very keen to ensure that they were put in the most appropriate way. So the work has been done up front, it's still going on in conjunction with the Highway Authority, and each development that is permitted is being required to make the appropriate contribution. And of course, the infrastructure that's required to be delivered prior to the occupation of any new homes will be a condition of each planning permission. So there is that built into the control that you have as planning authority to ensure if there is an argument that certain mitigation should be in place before dwellings are occupied, then that of course is part of the planning permission that's granted. So I hope that helps, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs Sims. Mrs Wojciechowski, you wish to come back?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would like to come back. Thank you, Elizabeth. That's very helpful. Again, I would draw members' attention to the economic climate that we're in at the moment. We're assuming that all these developers are going to deliver. For some of them, they may not deliver simply because it's not worth putting all their eggs in one basket and not selling at the market rate that they want to, which will affect the contributions required for the county or anybody else to provide the infrastructure requirements. And interestingly enough, Berkeley Homes, Elizabeth mentioned Berkeley Homes at Appeal, absolutely quite right, but Berkeley Homes was one of those applicants that made it very, very clear that they wouldn't stump up the money for the Elmbridge Ridge because they said it was just far too expensive. So I think we have to be realistic and have expectations that we can match and meet rather than keep an eye, we should be planning for the future. And I think a lot of what we're doing is, on the balance, it's at risk. And as I say, if we look at the economic climate as it is, we're assuming we can make improvements to our infrastructure, providing that the developers deliver. But in this climate, they may not develop because they may not deliver because they may not want to put all their eggs in one basket. I think we need to have a holistic view of the whole situation. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Wojciechowski. Your point is noted. Mr. Seaborn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to develop the point that my colleague, Councillor Holder, made around paragraph 4.514. It states there, the main routes utilised to access the strategic highway network of the A3 in 2031, scenario 2, is between the south-east settlements of Dunsfold and Cranley via the unclassified roads to the Milford Junction, or from Farnham in the west of the borough via the B3001 to Milford. So in the east, this means Markwick Lane, Mare Lane, Salt Lane and Station Lane, none of which is remotely suitable for the volume of traffic that they experience now, never mind the predicted increase. Trip generation tables in the Surrey report show significant numbers of HGVs coming from the expanded commercial capacity at Dunsfold. And none of the roads that I've just quoted is suitable for HGVs, although parts of the 281 can accommodate them. The centres of Bramley, Shalford and the Guildford gyratory system, which is not discussed at all, are unsuitable for HGV transit. So the concern I have is around this report being a strategic report. You know, we're looking at a whole series of minor roads with no mitigations whatsoever planned for them, but we have this strategic report. Can I ask, the fact that there are no mitigations planned for that network of back roads, is it just because they're too small in terms of the total volume of traffic that they will have to carry, even though we're looking at them potentially grinding to a halt and causing misery for the residents around them? Yeah, I think that's my point. Hopefully it's fairly clear. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that's not correct on the basis that that will be one of the considerations that will be being asked of the developer to consider how those trips will route. So it is not correct that mitigation cannot be put onto those roads, but that is work that would have to be looked at the detailed planning stage. It's not something that we can, or at least restrictions are very difficult for us to model in the strategic model on those types of roads to show what can be done, and also that there is nothing that is being proposed at the moment. That is not to say that nothing will be proposed prior to those developments being progressed.
You wish to come back, Mr. Seaborn?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, please. Just very briefly. I mean, it seems to be a classic case of divide and conquer. I accept that individual plans have to manage it, but actually the reality here is that whole area is going to be swamped by the cumulative effect of a considerable number of plans, and therefore surely it should be addressed at the strategic level up front, rather than taking each individual project, which by itself might just scrape through. We've seen this time and again, and you know, here's the golden opportunity to work out what the problem's going to be, and yet we're saying, well, we'll split it into bits, and then hopefully it'll slip through. Thank you.
Yes, that's a very valid point, and that is something. This is why this work is very important, because it is used by colleagues in transport development planning as part of their discussions with prospective development, so that they have a picture of the cumulative impact, and that helps to inform the mitigation that comes forward. So whereas individual developments are considered in their own, the county officers have a picture of what the potential cumulative impact might be, and use that information, as I said, to inform their discussions.
Holder?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm just wondering, I think the widening of the A3 from 2 lanes to 3 lanes round Guildford is not only going to be hugely expensive, but I think it's going to take a considerable time before Highways England get round to doing it. I'm just wondering, with what the Chairman has already commented about the traffic coming in from Recklesham when the Hindhead Tunnel is closed, and also the traffic from Borden, whether you have considered the proposal that I know has been made by other councillors in the past of diverting traffic from Normandy through Purbright and out at Ripley and bypassing Guildford altogether. I think it would be a much cheaper, much easier way of doing things than trying to widen the A3 bypass through Guildford. What's your comments on that?
Thank you. There is work being done at the moment by Highways England in response to the government's road investment strategy, and they are looking at a number of options. I do not know what those options are at the moment, but I understand that they are looking at both an online solution, a widening of the existing road, and some potential other solutions. But they haven't reported yet. That work is still ongoing, and I believe it won't be being reported on until at least the autumn at the earliest. But they are, as I'm being told, looking at a number of potential options. Yes, I think that is one of the county's concerns, is that the actual widening of the A3 will be both expensive, difficult to engineer, and also cause problems whilst it's being constructed. But all that needs to be taken into account as part of the work that Highways England are doing at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed. I have 3 people who are not members of this committee who have given notice that they wish to speak. I'm going to take you now, gentlemen. Could I start with Mr. Gray?
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, some of the points I wanted to bring up have been addressed, so I will try and avoid duplication, which I'm sure you'll appreciate. The first part is there's great concern over the projection of HGVs, especially in the area around Dunsfold Park. And it's noted that the Dunsfold Park application that was agreed towards the back end of last year is not actually within the numbers. I wonder if the experts can give us assurances that the full impact of HGVs on these roads is taken into account. The second point is really to do with HGVs, but also to do with the mitigations. I seem to recall that it was Dunsfold Park who said that putting traffic lights in Bramley would have a limited effect on the road. Perhaps it's because they wanted to avoid it, but I wonder whether the officers could give us assurance that the Bramley and the Shalford improvements will actually give the mitigation that the models come out with. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Bryant, are you able to take that, or can somebody? Miss
just briefly, Chairman, on the HGVs. I mean, I think that is something that obviously is being looked at as part of the planning application, and we've also asked Mott MacDonald to do some work as well, looking at that. I think I'll leave Mr. Finney perhaps just to comment on the work that was done for what we call the stage 2 work, which was to look at some options around mitigation, which I think has already been summarised, but that was obviously the work that was done that we commissioned to look at the mitigation options around the A281.
Yeah, so in regards to the specific issue in Bramley itself, the mini roundabout, we know it's already a problem. We think it's only going to get worse, and we don't understand why the developer didn't propose any improvements. But we've looked at the signals, and we think it will increase capacity and it will reduce the delays. But certainly doing nothing isn't going to reduce delays.
Thank you. Mrs. Sims?
Chairman, just to add to that, of course, the planning application that's being negotiated in parallel has picked that point up, and the discussions with the Dunsfold Park's traffic assessment experts has included concern about the fact that the Bramley Junction is not intended, in terms of the original submission, to be improved. That is very much a discussion that's going on at present, so we're expecting amendments to the planning application to address that point. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I don't want to get into detail of the planning application, as I said last time, but thank you very much. Mr MacLeod, you indicated you wish to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to a large extent, expand on some of the points you made yourself, Chairman, in that Farnham sits in the corner of Surrey, in the corner of Waverley, and we're surrounded not just by Guildford, which has been mentioned in the presentations, but we're also surrounded by Hart, Rushmore, and East Hants. And the 2,300 houses that were mentioned in the presentations, in many ways, are the least of our problems. In these other boroughs, there's going to be something like 20,000 other houses built, a few thousand of which the Chairman has already mentioned at Whitehall Borden. There's also been extensive development at Aldershot and Farnborough, Fleet, Church Crookham, all over the place. And I'm concerned that in your modelling, you're not really taking all this into account. It doesn't seem to me you are. In terms of the mitigation that's referred to in both reports, it seems to be all to do with the A31 and facilitating through traffic. Now, in many towns, a bypass is seen as a benefit, and it takes traffic round the town. In many ways, in Farnham, the A31 is actually a curse, and it cuts the town in half, and it attracts a great deal of through traffic through the middle of the town. And the mitigation that we're being offered seems to be purely to do with the A31. We're being offered the mitigation at Hickley's Corner, which is to do things like change from two lanes going into the junction to 3. And that's actually the way it used to be when I first moved to Farnham. We used to have three lanes going into through 2 in the western direction, and then down to one underneath the bridge. And that actually proved to be pretty dangerous, actually, for pedestrians trying to cross the road and for people like cyclists, and there was a number of fatal accidents. And we're now being told that it will improve things to go back to that thing that didn't work very well a few years ago. The other mitigation seems to be fiddling around with traffic lanes and lights at the Shepherd and Flock, which will be a good thing, no doubt, and improve that roundabout. But the idea that this mitigation at Hickley's Corner and Shepherd and Flock is going to solve traffic problems in Farnham overall, it will just be seen as laughable by the people of Farnham. And I just push it to you that as a resident of Farnham, I just don't believe this. I don't believe this mitigation will mitigate these problems, and I'm not sure you've taken into account all of the additional development that's going to go on round about Farnham. So I have very much the same concerns as the Chairman, and I've expanded on them. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr MacLeod. I don't think Mr Bryant or Mr Finney said that the arrangements with the Shepherd and Flock, or indeed Hickley's Corner, were going to solve all Farnham's traffic problems. I did not hear them say that at all. So please don't misunderstand. They have said it will help. But Farnham has its own problems in the centre of town, which at the moment Surrey Highways are working on in trying to improve what we might do. And hopefully that will be available to be presented to the Farnham Task Group in September. So please, our visitors did not say those two things were going to solve Farnham's traffic problems. It won't, but it will contribute to an improvement. Thank you. I now have Mr Adams, who's sitting there very quiet, and thank you for putting your name down, Mr Adams.
Thank you, Chairman, for correcting me before, and I hope now the procedure is correct. Yes, we've come here today to look at this strategic review by Surrey, who are our strategic partner as far as transport's concerned, in respect of the local plan. And they concluded, as you said at the beginning, that while there were going to be increased problems in both delays and perhaps speed, but they didn't believe that any of these were actually severe. So I'd just like to ask Mr. Bryant, now that he has heard lots of comments from various committee members from different parts of the borough, whether in fact anything that he's heard today is, and when he takes that back and considers it, is likely to change that opinion. In other words, do you consider after what you've heard today that you'll come back and say parts of the borough are going to be suffering from severe issues and that consequently we will have to consider altering our plan?
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Adams. Mr. Bryant.
Thank you. I think it's important to realise that the term severe is a statement within the national planning policy framework, and it is a particular term that is used in connection with the residual impacts of potential planning after mitigation has taken place. It does not mean to say that congestion won't be severe in terms of what we might use the phrase in everyday language. It's a particular terminology. So generally it relates to safety. So if there is something that is considered to be detrimental to safety, then that can be considered, and that cannot be mitigated, then that may be classed as severe by an inspector in terms of when looking at a plan. Equally, if there are concerns that the residual impact after mitigation has taken place, again, is causing so much change in terms of a worsening of the network, then that may itself also be considered to be severe. I do not believe that to be the case for this particular proposal, local plan proposal. But I'm also very much aware that there are existing congestion problems in the borough, particularly in the Farnham area, and that's partly why Mott MacDonald have been commissioned to take on this extra work, and also that's also why this cumulative work will be being used by other colleagues in Surrey who are responsible for assessing planning submissions when they come in. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Bryant. Anybody else? Yes, Mrs. Forrester.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for allowing me to come back. I have to say, whilst I don't claim to understand your reports because they are technically challenging for somebody like me, I think it's an excellent piece of work, and I very much appreciate the opportunity for you to come along here today to explain it in a common sense part of a point of view. I think the reality here is that we're looking at the major road networks and the impact on those. What we're not looking at, and I'm not suggesting this should be looking at it, but it should be taken into account at some point or other, is that places like Farnham and especially places like Cranley, we're looking at how we get out onto the major roads. So what's going to happen in Cranley is we're just going to not get out of Cranley. That's the way we see it. But having said that, we all have to appreciate that it's an inevitable consequence of growth, that unless we give up our cars, our roads are going to continue to get congested. And it's inevitable. We can't have it all. So we've really got to be realistic about what we're suggesting here. It's change, it's progress, it's but unless we do something about alternative transport methods, we're not going to give up our cars. And we'll probably all drive home from here this afternoon. And it's as I say, we're not going to give up our cars. So we've got to have one with the other. One goes in hand with the other. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
I think houses will end up having more cars rather than less as the time goes on. But you're being a realist, Mrs. Wojciechowski, and for that I thank you. Anybody else? Yes. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd just like to follow on from Mr. Bryant's last points with a question to actually Mrs. Sims or Mr. Parrott, and that is the strategic highways assessment has gone into traffic volumes and congestion, but the point was made that that there are safety implications and also, of course, air quality implications. And of course, it's a plan that has only just rolled off the press. Sorry, a report that has only just rolled off the press. So can I ask the planning officers, what are we going to do very quickly to assess whether this new information has safety consequences or air quality consequences? Mott MacDonald addressed the safety consequences of the 281 corridor in their report, at least for the A and B roads, although we hear all the traffic's not going to use those, they're going to go down the back roads. There's nothing about safety in the Farnham piece of the report. So it seems to me that we're missing some work here that would be an important contribution before we're able to move forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Parrott, did you wish to comment? Are you going to hand it over to Mr. Bryant and Mr. Finney?
I think in relation to the safety issue, I mean, there's a number of strands here. Firstly, and I know we've talked, and Mr. Bryant has talked about the use that county colleagues will make of the evidence in this document to inform their discussions with individual developers. We already know that is one of the issues that's been raised specifically by the County Council in relation to the Dunsfold planning application, because obviously it's been identified as a potential issue, and I think this is particularly the issue of the cross-country routing and different types of vehicles. Whenever we've had discussions with the county over, for example, the outputs from the Mott MacDonald work, we have been at pains to try and identify whether any of the findings there raise issues, for example, in relation to highway safety. And I don't think, and I'll let Mr. Finney comment if necessary, but I'm not aware that to date the County Council have raised particular issues around safety concerns to do with the Farnham work. What they have said is that the Farnham work has identified some areas where there are some knock-on impacts that probably need further investigation, and that's what they are looking into. As far as air quality is concerned, it is something we are in discussion with, and in fact only today I think my colleagues have been talking to environmental health as well about some of these issues on the back of questions previously raised about that, so that is something we are very, very mindful
of. Just in terms of the road safety, you're right, we haven't looked at the road safety issues in Farnham in any detail, so that hasn't been looked at, but it's probably needless to say that where there is congestion and queuing, that you will get accidents there. So relieving congestion is going to be a good way of reducing accidents as well. So if we can achieve that, that would help.
Mr. Band?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It seems to me one of the issues that keeps coming out of this is the issue of the mitigating measures which are proposed, both not only on the main roads but also on the minor side roads. And as we talk, every time we come up to this is an issue for the next planning application. But it seems to me that the quantum of the mitigation measures and the cost of doing this, I think we need to somehow start to look at the credibility of actually these being able to be funded through the planning applications which are being projected to come forward. Because unless they can be delivered, then the housing target itself cannot be delivered. If we're insisting, as we are, that the infrastructure must be there before housing is occupied, there is a huge amount of mitigation work to be undertaken borough-wise. And we've already heard that the developers are not prepared to do some of the mitigation work. If they're not prepared to fund it, where's the funding coming from?
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Band. Mrs. Sims?
Chairman, there's two points to pick up on that, and I'm going to ask Graham to pick up on the infrastructure delivery plan. But just to come back to, in parallel, if applications are coming forward in advance of the collective view, as has already been said, one of the responsibilities of the County Highway Authority in assessing a planning application is to have regard to cumulative impact, and that is ongoing. That is a current critical part of their assessment. Many of these developments are EIA development, and so other issues such as air quality are picked up again with an in-combination effect being a legal requirement of the environmental impact assessment to take into account. So to date, prior to the plan, that assessment is going on, and that links again to the work I said, for example, that's been going on in Cranley, in recognising these sites have been coming forward in advance of the local plan. That work quite appropriately has been brought forward, an assessment of the in-combination effect and how that can be distributed now, with developments coming forward early, in the best possible way. But in parallel with the plan, of course, you've got the emergence of the SIL schedule, which will be the means of collecting infrastructure contributions to support the plan. And then there's the infrastructure delivery plan, which is a full schedule of required mitigation to support the growth, including transport infrastructure. And that will be what will be needed to be identified, developed and costed and identified in terms of its delivery to support the plan. So Graham probably wants to add some detail to that, so I'll just pass over to him.
Well, only to say that obviously we are already and have been for some time working up some of the details of what goes into that infrastructure delivery plan, and it's a bit of a living document that will have to be updated and revised. That will be the latest position on that will be available and published alongside the plan when it is published, but I think it's fair to say that in some of these areas, for example, where there may be some additional mitigation measures that need to be investigated further in Farnham, that these will probably still continue to be added to that as we go forward between now and when the plan is actually considered for submission formally for examination.
Mr. Hill?
Well, yes, I think this is a very, very good point that's been raised. I mean, an example might be that adjacent to the Shepherd and Flock roundabout are three fairly substantial developments. There's a hotel, a rest home, some new houses, and yet there's no sign of any of the mitigating roadworks being carried out. Are they going to be? No, that's building a bridge for access to the site, isn't it?
The works. That's where they're coming out. I don't know exactly what was required as part of that development in terms of 278 works and Section 106 contributions, and we can certainly check that. But there would have been the usual assessment as to whether or not the development was safe, whether there was capacity for the trip generation, also what relevant contributions should be made. So that, as part of the normal process, would have been taken into account. And of course, even though the government has now imposed a restriction on the pooling ability of the council, before when we had the PIC schedule, we could actually pool each development and use it as we sought fit in conjunction with the County Highway Authority. We now have that limitation on no more than 5 106 agreements to contribute to a single piece of infrastructure. But nevertheless, that still enables for big developments, for quite sizable, important infrastructure to be delivered. So that process of monitoring is going on, and for as long as we don't have SIL, we will be able to use that process. Thank you, Chairman. SIL could deliver several million to Waverley, but it can't come in, as I understand it, until we've got a local plan. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg, really. Then yes, Mrs. Forochevsky.
Thank you. I will be very brief. Just another reality check. I think what we really need and what we're really desperate for, our developers can't provide. They just haven't got the monies to do so. And if they do, can it make those schemes unviable in terms of their delivery? And infrastructure is not just about transport, it's about other issues. So when we keep looking to the developer to solve our financial problems, I think, we've got to get the balance right. And I'll end on this note. One of the applications in Cranley, when it was proposed, cited it as having a railway station. We don't. We don't have a
Blame
railway
Mr.
station,
Beeching
but one of the
for
developers
that.
thought we did.
I can't help about your railway station. Sorry about that. Thank you. Anybody else? because I have another meeting after this one. It's called the Housing Improvement Subcommittee. So can I just thank our guests very much for coming along and helping us with this. I found it very useful. It gave me an opportunity for my plea for the Recklesham Relief Road. And I might talk to you later about the Western Bypass, Mr. Bryant. But thank you all very much indeed. And it's been a long, arduous 6 hours we've been at this, 2 today and 4 the other day. So thank you all very much and for your contributions. And thank you to the officers.